Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we are in the final round, round 14 of the 2016 Canada's tournament. Winner of this tournament does go on to face Magnus Carlsen in November for the World Championship. Now our competitors today just happen to be tied for first. Not because they're tied for first is why they're playing today. It was predetermined before the tournament that they would play last round. Just for the chess fans, it just so happens that they are number one and tied for first. So Sergei Karjakin playing the white pieces from Russia. His opponent, Fabiano Caruana from the United States, playing the black pieces. If you're not too familiar with the situation, Vishy Anand tied today against Peter Svidler. And so with that, Sergei Karjakin can win the tournament with either a win or a draw. So he just has to draw, and he wins. Fabiano Caruana playing the black pieces. He's got a tough road ahead, but he's going to bring everything he can. But he needs to win this match to be the champion. So we'll go ahead and get into it. Sergei starts out with pawn to e4 and then pawn c5. And we've been seeing a lot of the Ruy Lopez getting into the Berlin defense. Fabiano Caruana decides, okay, I got to go with the sharpest defense. A tie gets me nowhere. I have to win this. So the Sicilian defense is how he responds. Knight f3, knight c6, pawn d4. After the exchange on board, knight f6, knight c3, pawn to d6. So a little bit different than some of the more common moves from black. Pawn to e6 is pretty common. Pawn to a6, pretty common as well. But trying something a little bit different. Pawn to d6. Bishop to g5, getting it outside the pawn chain. Pawn e6, queen to d2, pawn a6, and then castle on the queen side. So it looks like Sergei Karjakin is playing a pretty aggressive opening, castling on the queen side, getting ready to attack on the king side. Fabiano has a few different options. It's going to be pretty difficult for him to go ahead and castle on the queen side. Sicilian defense, after you kind of lose your pawn on the c file, it does get a little tough. So he could try to develop bishop to e7, castle on the king side right away, or he could completely abandon that, start to push immediately on the king side, and just not even worry about his king safety. Black continues with bishop to d7, a pawn to f4, so immediately starting to attack on the king side. Pawn h6, forcing the bishop back, and then pawn b5. So Fabiano starts to attack on the queen side. Bishop takes on f6, and then pawn captures on f6. And this is one of those moves where if you kind of look at it, you can see Fabiano's approach. He is not going to do the common, safe, my opponent knows exactly what I'm going to do, which would be queen to f6. This is definitely the most common, straightforward path. Pawn takes on f6 is pretty much saying that he may not castle on the king side. Now, he could still castle on the queen side. He's not going to have a lot of protection in front of his king, but if he wants to swing his a8 rook over to the king side of the board, he does have that option. But Fabiano knows that he's got a tough path ahead of him, so he's going to try to put his opponent in as many awkward situations as possible, hoping that Sergei just takes a lot of time in every position and essentially gets to a point where he doesn't have a lot of time, makes a mistake, and then Fabiano can take over. So from here, pawn to f5, queen down here, b6. We do see an exchange on board. So now kind of all the pawns have gone past the 7th rank and the king hasn't moved. So there's not a lot of protection in front of this king. So Sergei, eventually, if he can get behind enemy lines, he can have a strong attack on Fabiano's king. Fabiano, on the other hand, he can just really start to push and put a lot of pressure on his opponent. He's got 3 central pawns. He can put his king over here to f7, even e7 potentially. Use this really as protection. And then swing these rooks over to c8, control that semi-open file, to g8, control everything coming from the sides, and then just kind of overwhelm his opponent. Now the knight takes on c6, the queen recaptures, and then bishop here to d3, just trying to hold on to this isolated pawn here on e4. Now on black side, Fabiano, he has his own isolated pawn here on h6, so Sergei, if he wants to, he can attack this at some point, but Fabiano is going to be looking to start to attack this pawn here on e4. Fabiano continues with pawn to h5, king to b1, protecting the a2 pawn. Pawn to b4, forcing the knight to move. Knight's back here, e2, and then queen c5, just pushing up material a little bit, controlling the center of the board as much as possible. Rook over here, f1, attacking the pawn on f6. Two ways to kind of combat this. One is just to immediately defend this. The other one is to just play kind of an in-between move. This bishop here on h6, attacking the queen. The queen comes back here to e1, and then pawn to a5. And I thought this was pretty interesting to play a5 and not really try to protect the square here on f6. And then we see pawn to b3. Another interesting move. I thought for sure, I still think it's probably best for white to just take here on f6, queen e5, rook back here to f3, bishop g7. I think this is fine. White is up material on board. He can start to put a lot of pressure on the pawn on e4, bishop to c6 eventually. He can overwhelm him, but white right now is up material on board. I think he can definitely hold on to it, just defend the center of the board as much as possible, but decides to not take that. Instead, kind of play more of a defensive move, pawn to b3. Rook g8, as we talked about, controlling the semi-open file. Pawn g3, kind of stopping that. King e7, just adding some protection on these pawns, so the minor pieces, the queen, they don't have to worry about protecting that. Bishop here to c4. Attacking the square here on e6, just more central square. If the pawn here on d5 wants to come there, just adds another layer of protection to start to defend that. And then bishop to e3. And this is a move I really don't like from Fabiano, because you have Sergey over here. He's fine just exchanging all material off the board. A draw for him is a win. He doesn't even need to do anything too crazy. He's trying not to do anything too crazy. Once the bishop comes down here, we have knight to f4, and all of a sudden this sort of just stops this bishop. The bishop's probably going to fall. Bishop takes. All of a sudden the pawn recaptures. More material that Fabiano can't use to attack his opponent, put him in tougher positions. So kind of surprised to see bishop to e3. Even more surprised to see rook to f3. For those who actually kind of watched the stream with the Grandmasters giving their commentary, they all thought knight f3 was going to be pretty automatic. But Sergey seems to be looking at these moves for quite a long time, which is what Fabiano wants. He wants a lot of time to be spent on every single move. And it seemed like 3 to 5 minutes every single move, which over time really definitely chips away. You get 2 hours for the first 40 moves, and then after that you do get an additional hour. From here, the rook's going to come to a g4. And then queen to f1, just adding another layer of protection. Start to attack this pawn here on f6. And then a rook over here, f8, protecting the pawn a little bit more. Now we see knight to f4, and bishop is somewhat forced to go ahead and take that. We do see an exchange, and then pawn to a4. And then pawn takes on a4, and then after the bishop takes, then queen here to d3. So white has done a good job of starting to get some material off the board, and now he looks to really control this d-file in the center of the board. Bishop back here to c6, attacking the isolated pawn. That's really all Fabiano has going for him right now. Is attacking that isolated pawn. Bishop back here to b3. Nice outpost. It's going to be tough for Fabiano to really get this off the board. Rook here to g5. Pawn to e5, which is another interesting move. It gives up a pawn on board. Now white can kind of shift his focus to start to attack this now isolated pawn on the b file. Fabiano can either try to protect this pawn here or completely avoid it and try to attack over here on the king side. But right now, Fabiano all of a sudden, he's winning. This is a position. He's up a pawn of material. He's controlling the center of the board. So things right now look very bright for Fabiano. And both sides have about 20-25 minutes left in the game. So they don't have a ton of time to be thinking about all their moves. Now white plays rook to c4, attacking the queen, and then rook to d5. And I thought this was pretty interesting from Fabiano. He looks like he's going to allow his opponent to exchange off board, and I was kind of surprised we didn't see it. We see queen here to e2, But we could have easily seen rook takes, the rook takes here on d3. We see an exchange on board, pawn up here to d4. That takes, the rook takes here. I think he may have looked at it and said, hey, my opponent is up upon a material. I need to keep as much material as I can to maybe get a different, better position on board, because he looked at this and maybe calculated and said, I think I'll lose in this position. I can't gain that that pawn back potentially. So in this position, he just didn't really like it. You're going to see the rook swing over here to b8, protecting that isolated pawn. So as we do come back on board, the queen is going to come to e2. Now the black king or black queen goes back to b6. Now rook over here to h4, starting to attack the isolated pawn here on h5. Also a discovered attack with the bishop attacking the rook here on d5. As you can imagine, the rook almost has to move. It still wants to maintain control of the h5 square and attack the queen. The queen comes back here to d3, just adding pressure on this d file right here. And then bishop to g2. And this was another interesting move that a lot of the commentators, they did not think they would see. Pawn to d5 makes a lot of sense. It kind of blocks a lot of this pressure from this light square bishop. You know, this square right here is being protected by the bishop and the rook right here. So it's going to be tough for a lot of crazy shenanigans. All in all, this is pretty good. Now, Fabiano was getting pretty bold. He said, I'm going to go ahead and play my bishop down here to g2. Then he wants to play d5 and then bring his bishop back here to e4. A much better outpost move for his bishop, still controlling this long diagonal, but definitely a pretty optimistic view of kind of how this would go. Rook back here to d4, so not nearly going to be as strong now to bring his bishop back, but pawn to d5, as we talked about, queen here to d2, and then rook to e4. And this is kind of a crazy move if you think about it. And this is where he kind of puts his opponent to the test. The entire tournament hinges on this one move. Sergei Karjakin has about 14 minutes left on the clock in this position. As he looked at it, it's very tough to find the best move. Now, the best move on board is actually rook takes on d5, sacrificing the rook after the pawn takes here on d5 for the queen to come up here to d5, threatening mate with queen to d7, putting a lot of pressure on his opponents. There's not a lot of great squares for black to defend this. To be honest, we could have rook to d4 and just try to give some of that material back. Queen takes on d4, the queen takes, rook takes up here, and then rook over here to b8, trying to hold down this material. All of a sudden, black is down a pawn, and he's, for the most part, trying to hold on to a pawn or a draw in this position, but still pretty tough. But if we come back after rook here to e4, any other move from white but beyond rook takes on d5, it pretty much loses. It's going to be super tough for white to really hold on, just adding too much pressure on board. In the end, Sergei thought for about 5 minutes, and he did find the move. Rook takes on d5. Very, very strong move. Play continues as we talked about. Pawn takes on d5. We now don't see rook to d4. Instead, we see a queen to c7. Just trying to hold on, does not want to get checkmated, and then queen to f5. And this is a move that Fabiano said that he didn't really calculate the entire line. He didn't see queen to f5. You know, he may have been trying to calculate queen to h5. Even if he didn't calculate queen to f5, it's still a very, very much losing position. It's going to be tough for Fabiano to kind of hold on to this. Rook to f7. Bishop takes on f7. You know, there's no way to really stop the attack right here. Queen to e5, rook up here d7, king f8, rook to d8, and in this position, Fabiano resigned. As far as how it could continue, you know, you may say, hey, he could just take here on f7, but this is still going to be tough to hold on to. We have queen here to h7. The king is pretty much forced to come here to e6, and then queen to d7 would be checkmate. No other moves are good as well. They all end in mate. So Fabiano gave his best effort. I applaud him for finding the craziest lines he could possibly find in this Sicilian defense. But all in all, Sergei Karjakin, he fended him off, played extremely well, and not only got the draw, but got the win. So Sergei Karjakin, winner of the 2016 Canada's tournament, he will represent Russia and face Magnus Carlsen in November for the World Championship. So we definitely have some youngsters. I know in the previous rounds we've had Magnus Carlsen versus Vicianon. So I think it'll be an exciting match. They've played almost 20 matches against each other. Sergei has won 1, Magnus Carlsen's won 3, and then they've drawn about 15. Just to kind of give you some historical reference on how they've done against each other. All in all, I think it's going to be great. Both players are playing extremely well. My guess is Magnus Carlsen will win. I just think he's that strong. But I am extremely excited for November to see these players face off. Hopefully you enjoyed this tournament. A lot of back and forth. The leaderboard just got so congested at the top. It was anyone's game for a long time. So it's exciting to kind of see every day, people going from first to third to tied for first. Then it all comes down to the last match, and we got to see 2 players actually play for the title. So thanks for watching all the videos of the coverage. And I will see y'all in the next one. And definitely in November, we'll be having coverage of every round of the World Championship. So thank you guys, and I'll see you later.